Hey girls and gals, welcome back to my channel. My name is Taylor and today's video is going to be 21 classics that I'd like to read in 2021. Did I pick 21 classics for this list just because I liked the symmetry of 21 books for 2021? Yes. Am I going to read them all in 2021? Probably not. Not that I'm not looking forward to reading these books because I wouldn't put them on any sort of TBR if I wasn't interested in them, but classics are just so intimidating to me. As a reader, even if they are shorter, they just tend to be intimidating reads. So while I do want to read all 21 of these books very much, this is definitely not going to be a TBR just for 2021, but it is just going to be for the foreseeable future, just some classics that I have on my radar that I would like to read. Now, I did divide this video up into 3 separate categories. The first category is rereads, so classics I've read before and want to read again. The second segment is going to be kind of some more obscure classics that I don't hear talked about as much on BookTube or the internet in general, and also ones that I feel like not a lot of people are assigned for required reading, so ones that are probably still popular because they are still classics, but I don't hear about as much. And then the third segment is ones that I feel like everyone has read except for me, and I just really want to read them and experience what so many other people have. So for rereads, the first classic that I would like to reread in the near future would be Sister Carrie by Theodore Dreiser, and I read this in 11th grade English class and I don't remember anything about it. I know that I did a good job in that class overall, and as you can tell from my annotations in the book, I did the work. And I just don't remember anything about it. So that's why I'm interested in reading this book, because I feel like in terms of classics that I had to read in school, I have really strong opinions about them, whether or not I loved them or really despised them. This one I don't remember anything about. I know it talks about some gender and class issues and it follows the titular Sister Carrie. It takes place in a big city. I want to say like Chicago or New York, something like that, but I want to revisit this one also just because I own it. I own my very annotated copy. This I did get for school, so it is nice because it's one of those critical editions where there are like footnotes in the text where it does give you some background information, maybe explain some things for you in the text while you're reading it. So I don't know, starting off with a heavy one. It looks very thick, but the book is actually only 355 pages. The rest of it is like supplemental text, which might help me understand this book a little bit better. So that's number 1 on my list. The next book on my list is Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. I read this one when I was a senior in high school, I believe, and I remember really enjoying it. And again, the recall on this one for me, I know this is a story about a murderer and it takes place, I think it alternates between the murderer's point of view and the detective's point of view. So it's very much a cat and mouse game, but you're also exploring like their inner thoughts and just the ways they see the world. And this is just an investigation of forces that impel a man toward sin, suffering, and grace. So I know this is a classic that a lot of people actually really like. I feel like most people who have read this that I know of at least did enjoy this. So I am looking forward to checking this book out again, just because I feel like if I was forced to read it for school and I still enjoyed it, I think I would enjoy reading it on my own time even more. The next book that I'd like to reread is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, and this one I actually remember not liking it in school very much. I read this in 10th grade, but I remember one of the things that I really didn't like at the time was the teacher and how she was teaching it, and we literally spent like a week on each chapter of this book and annotated it to death. So the Brontes are obviously very highly regarded and I would like to look into more of their work, but I figured why not just start here and check out a book that I already do have some familiarity with, and I feel like I might like it more as an adult. And one thing that I have noticed about my reading preferences as I've grown older is that I do really tend to like more character-driven stories and slower stories, more gothic style tales and narrative. I'm pretty sure a lot of people do consider Jane Eyre gothic. I could be wrong, I don't know a lot about this one. I just know that it follows Jane Eyre. She moves into a house. I think she's getting married to someone who's been married before, and there's a lot of fire and ice imagery. That was my 10th grade takeaway from it. So looking forward to delving delving into it more and maybe discovering a new appreciation for it this time around. My next classic reread that I want to do this year is kind of cheating because it's technically 3 books. It was originally published as 1 though, so that's why I'm just counting it as 1 book, and that would be the Lord of the Rings series by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is my copy of The Return of the King. I actually have my box set downstairs, but just for purposes of this video, just going to use my very vintage classic version that I found for like 50 cents at a thrift store. So I am currently working my way through the Fellowship of the Ring, so I just plan on reading the entire trilogy this year. I'm reading them in audiobook for the first time, and I've never actually read them in their entirety as an adult. So The Lord of the Rings is definitely a classic when it comes to the fantasy genre, so I'm looking forward to diving back into the world. I absolutely love the film adaptations, and I'm a lot more familiar with those than I am with the books, so I'm looking forward to reading all 3 of them hopefully this year. And honestly, in this list, if I read like any of the books, it's definitely going to be the Lord of the Rings series, just because I have already started that series and hopefully plan to finish all 3 of those books this year. And then the last reread that I have on my classics list is The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. I did read this one in 11th grade, and I really enjoyed this one in high school. I haven't read it since. I have read other things by the author before on my own accord, but I've just never returned back to this one, and I definitely remember when reading this one, I couldn't place my finger on why I enjoyed this book so much, but I really did enjoy like the atmosphere and the unreliable narrator. I really enjoyed the writing style of this one, at least when I was in high school, so I'm looking forward to checking back in and seeing if I still really enjoy this one as much. It has a lot of tropes that I enjoy in contemporary fiction. If I'm remembering correctly, it is told in a very conversational sort of format between the narrator and the reader, and it's like they're sitting down and telling you their life story, and it follows a very troubled youth going through some of his misadventures, and he's an unreliable narrator, so I am looking forward to picking this book back up. Now we're moving on to some classics that, like I said, they're definitely not obscure because they're still considered classic literature, but I haven't seen people talk about them as much in terms of booktube or required reading lists when it comes to school reading. So the first book I'd like to read in this category is The Talented Mr. Ripley by Patricia Highsmith. I did see the movie version of this a long time ago, but I don't remember too much about it, but I have read a lot of modern books that kind of take this story and play with it, or really are heavily inspired by this book, so I thought I would pick up the source material for so many of like the dark academia books that I do enjoy so well. This is about a young man named Tom Ripley, and he is a very charismatic young man who does not have a lot of means, and he meets someone named Dickie Greenleaf. He is his contemporary in a lot of ways, except Mr. Greenleaf has a lot more money and comes from a completely different world than Mr. Ripley. So the book is following their friendship, and then Mr. Ripley kind of takes that into more of an obsession with his friend. So I believe this book is considered by many to be an inspiration for a lot of dark academia modern classics of our time. It genuinely sounds like the type of books that I've been really gravitating towards recently because I cannot get enough of gothic literature, dark academia, so I am intrigued in reading this one and then maybe re-checking out the movie to kind of explore that adaptation once I'm done with the book. The next classic on my list is Orlando by Virginia Woolf, and this is about a nobleman named Orlando. He lives in England. He's a man. That's important because halfway through the book, something like that, he wakes up to find himself a woman, and this book just kind of deals with the roles of women in the 18th and 19th centuries and kind of explores those dynamics. This just sounds like a very fun and interesting premise, and I just want to know more about it. I think obviously it's going to be tackling a lot of ways in which society at the time viewed men versus how it viewed women, and I've not heard anyone talk about this one, so yeah, I'm looking forward to reading it. The next classic on my list is Zammy, A New Spelling of My Name by Audre Lorde. I believe this is one of those books where it is kind of like a fictionalized autobiography, so it is an autobiography, but it's just told in more of a fictional way, embellished in some ways, and I think there's some sort of magical realism in here as well. I could be totally off base on that last part, but this is an autobiography in nature, but it's just told in more of a fictitious way, and this is about the author's childhood memories in Harlem to her coming of age in the late 1950s. This just explores not only New York in the 1950s, but being Black and gay and poor and female in New York during that time as well, and the intersection of all of those things. I have heard that this book is not only like very insightful to read, but also just a joy to read as well, just in the way that it's told. I don't know if I'd say joy actually, but the way that it's written is very beautiful and moving as well. So both the style and the content of this one sound like it would be up my alley, so that's why it's on this list. Again, I have not heard a lot about this one. I was trying to find some classics to really round out this list and trying to identify like which genres of classics really interest me and I thought this book just sounded really compelling. The next book on my list is The Stepford Wives by Ira Levin. Now this concept I feel like is definitely in like public consciousness and a lot of people reference it, but I haven't actually heard a lot of people talking about this book, and I have read Rosemary's Baby and I absolutely love it. It's one of my favorite classic horror books. But this is about a woman and her family who move to a beautiful town of Stepford, and it seems too good to be true. For behind the town's idyllic facade lies a terrible secret. A secret so shattering that no one who encounters it will ever be the same. And this is political commentary, satire slash horror, which is one of like my favorite subgenres of horror. It says this is a savage commentary on a media-driven society that values the pursuit of youth and beauty at all costs. I feel like this book is heavily referenced not only in media at large, but especially the horror genres, and a lot of horror books that I have enjoyed in the past, or like some more social commentary books in the past that I've read have really played upon this book, so I definitely want to read the source material. And this has definitely been on my list for a while because like I mentioned beforehand, I really love Rosemary's Baby as a book, not just as a classic horror book, but just as a horror book really holds up today as just a genuinely terrifying novel, and I'm really excited, hopefully, that I will like this one just as much as I liked Rosemary's Baby. So this next one is a trip. And I really don't know what I'm getting myself into with this one, but that is going to be Perfume, The Story of a Murderer by Patrick Suskind. And this is about a serial killer that has a very good sense of smell, and he kills women based on their smells, and presumably it's something about perfume too. I think this is one of the ones that's edging up on like the closer to modern end of classics. I think this one came out in the 80s, at least that's what it says on Goodreads. So that's far enough back for me to consider it a classic, just in the sense that I do hear a lot of people in the horror community talking about this one as more of a modern classic, but since it came out in the 80s, I feel more comfortable putting it on this list as opposed to a modern classic that might have come out in the 2000s. I think this is going to be very gross and very disturbing, but like I mentioned before, I definitely see this one more on Bookstagram than on BookTube, and again, not really mentioned so much, but kind of mentioned in passing as more of a modern classic, so I just figured I'd add it to my list. I really enjoy true crime as a genre, which I know this is not factual, but I enjoy true crime and horror involving this sort of thing, so I am interested to see what that's all about. And then the last book in this section is going to be The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte, and I feel like Anne is the most slept on of the Brontes, just in terms of popularity of the works, right? Because I had not heard about this one until I did some research for this specific video. Again, I'm not an expert on the Bronte sisters at all, but I have heard that Anne's style is definitely a little bit different than Emily or Charlotte Bronte's, so that kind of intrigues me a little bit there. But this is the story of a woman's struggle for independence. So it follows a woman who flees a very disastrous marriage, takes up a new name, and earns her own living, which sounds very interesting because obviously that is not the convention of the time. Again, I've heard this deals on a lot of social issues during the time that women faced, and it is also supposed to be written in a very ironic style as well, which sounds intriguing to me. And like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I do really want to read some of the Bronte sisters' work because I feel like I would really enjoy a lot of their work now as opposed to my introduction to them when I was like 13 or 14 years old. I also wanted to kind of start with this one because I know a lot of other works get very hyped up, and I just don't want to go into it with a lot of preconceived notions about like what the writing style is, what I should be expecting from a Bronte book. So I'm looking forward to checking this one out. And now we're moving on to the third and final section of this video, which is classics, where I just feel like everyone but me has read, and I kind of have FOMO and want to see what the hype about all of these books is about. The first book in this section is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This is actually a classic where I know the story too. I feel like I've read a ton of literature that kind of takes this as source inspiration and just kind of the vibes and themes of it in general, or just mentions it in a ton of media. Like for example, even The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina heavily features Dorian Gray in it. And I feel like this is a classic where everyone kind of knows what it's about, but I really want to check it out because I love Gothic literature. This seems like it would be right up my alley. This is about a man who makes a deal with, I think, Satan himself for eternal youth, and I believe he can live forever, but he has a portrait that ages instead of him. So while he stays young and beautiful forever, the portrait gets older and older. So I'm not trying to go into this one with too high of expectations, but I do anticipate that I will like this one just based on my favorite classics already, and just I enjoy a lot of books that play upon similar themes or are inspired by this source material. So I really want to read this one sooner rather than later so I can actually say that I've read the source material of something that gets referenced in popular culture constantly. The next book on my list is another one that is very much more of a modern classic than a traditional classic in what people consider like the time period for classics, but that is going to be Kindred by Octavia E. Butler, and this is definitely a classic in the sci-fi genre, and as I delve more into sci-fi, I would like to pick up some more classic tales. And this is about a woman named Dana who lives in 1976 California until suddenly she is transported through time to antebellum Maryland, and she is Black, so obviously this is going to cause a lot of conflict going back to that time period. So that's all I really know about this one. Goodreads actually says this is the first science fiction that's written by a Black woman, so I might try and see if I can obtain a copy of this one and read it in February for Blackathon. But this has a lot of tropes that I do really enjoy in science fiction, so while this one, you know, is definitely like a modern classic as opposed to just a classic, I think it definitely counts. So I'm looking forward to checking out, honestly, anything by Octavia E. Butler. That is an author that has been very high on my need to pick up list, but I figured here would be a really good place to start because it is a standalone and it is like a cornerstone of modern science fiction classics. Now, while that one was more of a modern classic, we're definitely jumping back in time for this next one, and that is going to be The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. This is another one where I feel like everyone kind of knows the premise already, and where tropes of this or just outright mentions of this is used very commonly in media today, but I haven't read it, so apparently this is a novella, which is exciting because that is definitely a lot less intimidating for me than a full-length classic. But this is about a London lawyer named John Gabriel Utterson, and he investigates strange occurrences between his very old friend Dr. Henry Jekyll and the evil Edward Hyde. It's a classic horror novella, and I've read most of the horror classics, or at least the really popular horror classics at this point in time, so I'm just trying to round out and read all of like the traditional monster stories. I feel like I know what this one's about, so I am looking forward to it, and a novella is definitely feels a lot more accessible than a full-length novel. The next book on my list is going to be A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, and I'm picking this one up honestly because it's one of my dad's favorite classics, and that's about it. I have not had a very good relationship with Charles Dickens. I'm not a big fan of A Christmas Carol or Great Expectations, which are the only two things that I have read by him before. My dad and I definitely have different reading tastes, but we do have a lot of commonalities in between. We tend to read very different genres, but we tend to like a lot of the same tropes and themes and styles, even though we are reading like different works of fiction. So if he likes this, I feel like I might as well. This is about the French Revolution, and all I know is it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. I feel like it has one of the most iconic opening lines. So yeah, I don't know. Third time's the charm for Charles Dickens, right? The next book on my list is the very infamous Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. And this is one that I'm very nervous about because I know the original intention of this work was definitely not to romanticize what is going on in it. So this is another satire. It is satire. I know it gets romanticized to hell, which is like the exact opposite point of what this book is trying to make, but it is a man who falls in love with a 12-year-old, marries her mother so he can be close to her. Yeah, Lolita. I don't think I'm gonna have a fun time with this one, nor do I think I'm going to enjoy it, but I feel like I need to read it. I already kind of know about it because this book is very heavily talked about, just in terms with still how relevant it is to society and how very unfortunately ironic it is that the story originally was supposed to be calling out these things in society, and then the story itself gets romanticized when obviously it's talking about things that are awful and get romanticized. So I'm interested in it. I'm not looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a tough read for me, but I would just like to have said that I have read it myself. Next book on the list is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. This book actually I feel like is currently getting a ton of adaptations and retellings, so I'm interested in reading the source material. So this is a gothic tale about a woman named Rebecca marries a widower and she moves into his estate, and there's just some very suspicious things that go on with how his wife died maybe, or just how her presence is still, I don't think it's supernatural, but how her presence is still very much felt in the estate. And yeah, again, this is one that has a lot of adaptations, and I just really would be interested in picking up the source material. The next classic on this list is one that I'm very much looking forward to, but also I'm trying not to have super high expectations for, because I have watched or read so many adaptations of this source material and really enjoyed most of them, and that is going to be The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. This is a novella. I believe it is not a full-length novel, but this is a novella about a nanny who goes to this estate and is watching two children, and everything is not what it seems. So I read The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware. I really enjoyed that one. It's an adaptation of this. And then I also absolutely love The Haunting of Bly Manor, which takes not only this book but a lot of other works by Henry James as inspiration and weaves them all together. Highly enjoyed that one too. We Don't Talk About the Turning, the movie that came out last January, was terrible. One of the worst horror movies I've ever seen. I really want to read this one because I have enjoyed the adaptations so much, and I'm trying not to put too high of an expectation upon it because I really did not like The Haunting of Hill House book. I do enjoy other Shirley Jackson works. I can't get into it, and I don't know why, because on paper it seems like the perfect classic for me, but it's just not my favorite. But I'm hoping this one really just lives up to the adaptations and that I'm not putting too much hype upon it and expectations from it for myself. So I definitely want to get to that one this year. The next classic on my list is one that technically I guess could have been a reread, but I don't really count it as one. That is going to be Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. I have read this as a child, except it was an abridged version designed for younger readers, and I have also seen a movie adaptation. I have not seen the most recent movie adaptation, but I really want to read this one. I remember really enjoying the abridged version as a kid, and I also they came out with a series of diaries for each of the sisters that I think it almost was like a collaboration with the Dear America diaries. It was very much written in that format and for that age group of children, but I loved those as a kid, but I've never read the unabridged original text of Little Women, and I just really want to read this. It's about 4 little women, the March sisters, and just them growing up. I love a good sister relationship in books, so I feel like reading a classic with that trope is going to be a classic, hopefully, that I'm really going to enjoy. And then the final 2 books on my list. The first one is going to be The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, and this is following Esther Greenwood, and she is very talented, very successful, very smart, but she's she's slowly going insane. This just chronicles Esther's mental breakdown and kind of the narrative changes from beginning to end as this character slowly dissolves into madness. I've heard great things about this one as it deals with mental health and talking about other topics like that one, so I'm intrigued on picking this up. This one has just always kind of been a tricky one for me because I have heard that it is very triggering and very dark, especially if you do deal with mental illness. So I don't know when I'll pick this up, but I'm just going to have to be very careful with it and be in a very good mindset when I read it. But I do really want to pick it up because this is another one that I've heard so many wonderful things about. And then the last book is not one cohesive classic, but rather a bunch of different classics put into one. I'll explain when I show you the book, but I have this Works of Edgar Allan Poe. This is volume 2. I just randomly stumbled upon this at some secondhand shop, and you know, it has the deckled edges. It looks like an old-fashioned sort of book. This is a collection of Edgar Allan Poe's most famous work, volume 2. So I don't know, maybe I can find volume 1 somewhere. This has a lot of the really famous ones like The Black Cat, The Mask of the Red Death, The Pit and the Pendulum, and The Telltale Heart. So I have read some of Poe here and there. I read some of his stories in high school. Actually it might have been junior high, but I've read a short story of his here and there. And then I've also read, when I was a kid, I had a collection of illustrated Edgar Allan Poe stories, and I don't know if the text in that was changed around at all for children or not. So I just want to get more into Edgar Allan Poe's stuff. I absolutely love horror. I love everything spooky, and obviously he has inspired so many things within the horror genre and supernatural fiction. So I definitely want to dive into more of his works as an adult. This one is very easily accessible to me. It seems like a good bind up with a lot of different stories in there because, like I mentioned, those popular ones, there are a lot of them that I have heard nothing about. So while I have read some Edgar Allan Poe in the past, I haven't read nearly enough because I definitely remember loving it in junior high and then the little bit that I did read in those illustrated versions as a child. So I would be very much interested in reading more of his work. Something like this I feel like would also be good to maybe once a month pick up a short story in this collection. So that is going to be the very last classic on my list. So there you have it. Those are 21 classics that I want to get to in the near future. If I get to a lot of them in 2021, that's absolutely great, but I'm not putting pressure to read all 21 of these in 2021. Just these are the 21 classics that I'm looking forward to prioritizing. I feel like classics can be very, very intimidating for a lot of people, and you know, I am included in that. So I really think I put together a list of books that genuinely sound like books that I would be interested in picking up had they been written today, which I feel like is important in classics because obviously they're written in a very different writing style than what is popular today. So subject matter definitely counts when trying to find classics that you might be interested in. But that is going to be the end of this video. Hopefully, you know, this time next year I will have read a lot of these classics. We'll see. But thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to give it a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, subscribe for more content from me, stay safe, stay spooky, and I'll see y'all on the other side. Bye!